Oh, wow. Hello, welcome everybody. Hello, welcome to our Engaging Stories, Developing Engaging Stories workshop. We're just going to hold for a few minutes and let everyone get settled. Wait for everyone to arrive. We have a lot of people here. If you want, maybe put in the chat where you're from. We do have some participants from all over. So yeah, hope everyone's having a good day. Just holding for a little bit. Yeah. India, Baltimore, great. I'm currently in Poland. Wow, yeah, I love that we have such an international crowd today. This is great. Thank you everyone so much for being here. All right. Just another minute or two and then we'll get started. Welcome, welcome. For those of you who are just joining us, we're waiting for everyone to, oh, I see some familiar faces in the crowd. Hello. To all of you who are new, we're just getting settled for another minute or so and then we'll get started. All right, I think, let's see. One second. All right. Great. I think, yeah, let's get started, I think. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Developing Engaging Stories workshop. My name is Gabriella Ortega Ricketts. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently in Warsaw, so it's a little late. And I am a white woman with a kind of brown curly mop of hair. And I'm wearing a reddish turtleneck and I have a white wall behind me. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm very excited for our upcoming conversation with Jeffrey Smith, introduced by Julie McElmurray and Arthur Pratt, who are two of our Getting Real Fellows from this past year's Getting Real Fellowship. I want to open the floor, starting off with Arthur Pratt, who will introduce himself and talk about his work in Sierra Leone. Arthur? Oh, sorry, also one more thing. Feel free to turn off your camera for the time being. And you can also click hide non-video participants to just clean up your view. It might help. It might help a little bit. Anyway, thank you so much. Arthur, feel free to get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Arthur Pratt. I am dark in complexion with short black hair. And presently, I'm just putting on like a sky blue shirt. And at my back, the guys at the Freetown Media Center. So we are like 5 or 6 in the room already. Others are joining online already from Freetown, Sierra Leone. The Freetown Media Center started sometime in 2009 when the rebel war ended in Sierra Leone. It was a project designed to help young Sierra Leoneans tell their own story. And this project started with Banker White, Zach Niles, These are US citizens and myself, Arthur Pratt, and Bami Boy. So at some point, we were able to bring young Sierra Leoneans together who had wanted to be filmmakers and, get people through filmmaking training. But we are disadvantaged in many ways, one of which is that we do not have film schools here in Sierra Leone. And so we strongly dependent on workshops, that are sometimes held by international filmmakers coming into Sierra Leone to do their shoots. And if anybody has time, they'll join us, and then give us some kind of workshop. And so little by little, we venture into the documentary filmmaking space by doing short documentaries, for mostly for NGOs organizations. And then at some point, we begin to tell our own story. Personally, my first documentary film was about a blind Sierra Leonean who is able to walk around the streets of Freetown by himself without using aid. And he's called Sori Kondi. It's a day in the life of Sori Kondi. And that was actually what got me into documentary filmmaking. And when the Ebola struck, we in the center decided to tell the story of the Ebola outbreak by ourselves. So together with the other guys at the center, Bami Boy, and also MJ Sesi Kamara, we decided to shoot the story of the Ebola within the communities. And that was how we have survivors, that came out at the end of the Ebola. So immediately after survivors, the center has been able to produce young and vibrant filmmakers. Just few of them are behind me. These are all professional, I could say professional documentary filmmakers who are now working, with their own clients and trying to build themselves. This workshop is very valuable for us, like I said, because we do not have film schools. We depend strongly on workshops like this to be able to get us, able to get us work on our stories and build our story life. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Arthur. Julie, you wanna take over?
Yes, hello, my name is Julie McElmurray. I live in North Carolina, and I was going to introduce myself, introduce my school that I started that only dreams of being like Arthur's center one day. And also I get to introduce Jeffrey. So I have silvery hair that a skylight is now making it look even more silvery, black blazer and a black and white shirt that is supposed to look like a marble, not actual marble, it's cotton. And behind me is a red brick wall, and I'm also wearing a headset. So again, my name is Julie McElmurray. I grew up in the beautiful Smoky Mountains of North Carolina. I picked up a camera when I was 41 years old with the intention of capturing the stories of a group of women I knew who are often depicted in really misogynistic ways. They're usually depicted as being ignorant of the world or sex maniacs or violent. And I actually knew these women in real life and know that that's not what they're like. So I wanted to be able to capture, preserve, and share their stories and have them speak for themselves and tell the world who they are. So when I first picked up that camera, I had 8 weeks to complete a documentary because I told some people I could make a documentary. And I literally Googled how do you make a documentary at the beginning of that 8 weeks and learned a lot thanks to the generosity of so many people, like Arthur mentioned, people that share their knowledge and skills online. And it just always amazes me how generous people are. The smallest detail of an editing program, you can Google it, and somebody out there has taken the time to explain how the heck you do this thing that might have taken me hours to figure out. And I get to watch a video and learn in just a few minutes. So in 8 weeks, I completed my first documentary. I found a composer who was willing to write a score for it. I did not know things like this concept of B-roll until days before I was to show this to an audience. And I'm sure they're grateful I learned about B-roll. And I didn't know about things like putting a story together as a story until I had made I've completed 7 short documentaries. For my 7th one, just in the nick of time, I learned this concept of, oh, what if it actually followed a storyline? And I'll just tell you that that documentary that follows a storyline has had almost 100,000 views on YouTube. The other ones have had like 2, 3, 5,000 views. Um, so skip ahead about a year, I knew that I needed to find other people like me that were trying to make films. And I've met people in coffee shops. I realized I needed a film school, and I wasn't going to spend $2,000 to go to a certain university in North Carolina, which offered a 1-week crash course. That's a lot of money. So I actually said, what if I spend less than that and find local film professionals to teach, local people like me who want to learn? And that's what I did. I found rooms like this that I could use. I found local professionals to teach and got the word out so other adults like me could come and learn from them. I had 10 people in my first official cohort in 2018. In 2019, we were able to partner with our library system in Charlotte, North Carolina. And thanks to them, we were able to offer most of our classes for free so that money was not a barrier. And we served 800 people in 2019. So like Arthur, I absolutely love doing what I can to make film education accessible. I mean, thank goodness for podcasts such as The Documentary Life. Thank goodness for resources like The D Word, which bring together documentary filmmakers, and other people are so generous to share their expertise. And Jeffrey is also a person who absolutely loves helping filmmakers make the best film possible. And what he's going to talk today is stuff that, just like all those people who make a YouTube video to explain to you how to do this little thing in your editing software, that's because they had to spend all the hours and annoyances of learning that thing. So Jeffrey has spent years learning what he's going to share with us today. So he's helping put us ahead a few years. So he knows the problems that we face as directors. He's passionate about films and helping other people make the best film possible out of their ideas and their footage. I've met a lot of people through my work with the D Word who have talked to Jeffrey, and he's helped them figure out what to do with either like their ideas at the idea stage, or sometimes they have just hundreds of hours of footage, and that's so overwhelming. Maybe some of you have experienced something like that too. You're like, oh my gosh, I know it's supposed to be verite, but did I really need to, does this really need to be a 200-hour film in real time? So Jeffrey, some of his amazing accomplishments: he's won 2 Emmy Awards as a director. He's completed 24 films for all the UK broadcasters and additional feature-length documentary films. He's won 40 international awards. His film, The English Surgeon, was listed on a New York Times best film list. And now Jeffrey is an in-demand creative consultant and story editor on a wide range of international projects. He works with producers and directors like you and me, and sometimes, well, he works with people all over the world to help get our ideas and our material and form it into a story. Because of course, I mean, my goal is, I'm never going to become a millionaire doing this, but I want my stories to be seen. And that's what Jeffrey wants for people too, is that their stories are seen. So Jeffrey's made himself available. If you want to visit his website, click on his button or his contact form to talk to him. So if you want a free chat with Jeffrey after this, then he is available. And he's also coming to the US for a few weeks. So there's some ways to see him in person if you are in the US. If you're not in the US, or you're not able to see him over those weeks, there's lots of ways to be in touch with Jeffrey otherwise, thanks to this wonderful technology we have today. But thank you, Jeffrey, for accepting the invitation from Arthur and myself. And thank you to the International Documentary Association for selecting Arthur and myself as fellows and for making today possible. And thank you to everyone who came today.
Me?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Gabriella. And thank you, Arthur, for having me, and certainly for the wonderful IDA for hosting us all. I mean, it's great to see so many people here and all gathered around the one thing we're deeply passionate about, stories. There's many ways we could explore storytelling because it enters our lives in a whole multitude of ways. And there's certainly many different ways of telling stories, but as there's no rules and manuals, they're evolving all the time. But one of the things that we certainly can do is have more options and choices as directors. And that's what I want to do today in the spirit of bringing you some thoughts about story archetypes, what they are, how they can be a really invaluable tool in your directing, writing skill set, and how they can really save you money and time with your projects. I got interested in the power of archetypes in film stories through a traumatic personal experience. Many years ago, I was working in Haiti with two Haitian filmmakers, making a piece about the first election there in 31 years. But on the morning of this beautiful special day, we uncovered a horrible massacre of 23 people at a voting station. The killers came back shooting at us, and as we were all running for cover, the journalist in front of me was killed. I got shot through the leg and across the shoulder. It was a genuinely traumatic time, and having to go back to live in the UK away from where all this happened certainly didn't help the healing process. 4 years of sort of constant nightmares later about this man who had nearly killed me, I just decided I had to go back to Haiti to confront what had happened, try and find him, as crazy as that might have seemed, and really just seek some inner peace. So I took a camera, I set off, and what I soon discovered was talking to my camera about my experiences as some sort of friend or confidant even was really helpful emotionally. And my silly male idea of trying to find the man responsible for shooting me never went anywhere, but my Haitian friend took me on a Haitian journey of healing. And 3 months later, I was a changed man. Really, finally, after about 5 years, I'd put my demons to bed. And one day as I was editing the film, I realized this process of telling my story, opening up to a camera and achieving catharsis had worked so well for me. Perhaps it could really work for other people also going through difficult times. And indeed it did. That one question has been at the heart of most of the 22 films I've gone on to make, and it unlocked really my whole career in documentary filmmaking. And I didn't sort of know exactly why, but a few years later, I was reading about storytelling and I discovered why giving people a voice for their own cathartic journeys was so healing for them, and also why audiences felt so moved and engaged by these stories. And basically, all of us go through difficult times, all of us confront pain, and all of us then seek to find some meaning and purpose again in our lives. And these universal human experiences have been with everybody from all cultures. And that's precisely because of that shared universality. This emotional rebirth story has become, over the thousands and thousands of years it's been told, it's become one of the key archetypal human stories we can all intimately relate to. And indeed, many viewers seek out rebirth stories because they want to see how other people deal with their struggles so that they can learn from those experiences that the character has, and they can bring into their own lives some sort of positive change. So we do that with a lot of films. We watch because we can learn from other people, and that's the beauty and the power of them. So this really is what an archetype is. It's a character type, a storyline, an event that's truly universal across the human experience, because it's a distilled, acute observation of the emotional, psychological states we all share, regardless of whether we're from Moscow, Mumbai, or Melbourne. And for us as filmmakers, an archetype creates a sense of familiarity. It allows our audience to easily connect with a new character or an event through their own experiences, so that the audience member can then start to make the unknown world of our story seem familiar to them. And that's so useful for all of us interested in reaching a wide audience, because in any of the countries we can make a film, then we can be sure that it will touch the hearts of people in completely different cultures, many thousands of miles away. Again, power of storytelling. So this cumulative wisdom of millions of storytellers that's brought together shared human emotions into these powerful archetypal stories, that has shaped everything from Roman Greek myths through to Indian, Asian, European epics, sagas, from totemic stories in Indigenous Australia, where I'm from, Africa, right the way through to Shakespeare and Hollywood. And archetypes are not born from or reflect one dominant culture. They're born from all of us, and they enable all of us as storytellers just to serve that higher good in bringing us all together. This is wisdom we can use right now as well in our projects today, if we choose to. And certainly if we feel reaching a wider audience is important to us. I know how powerful a single documentary film can be if it reaches a lot of people. My film, Presumed Guilty, made in Mexico, helped change the law in Mexico from presumption of guilt to presumption of innocence. Huge ongoing positive change for tens, if not thousands of people. So if we're going to create a better future for our poor, crazy world, I certainly passionately believe it needs more challenging, engaging documentary stories to help us do that. Your stories. Those who study stories, myths, and folklore from all over the world, they tell us there's about 7 archetypal stories. And although, of course, there's many different ways to tell your film story, and you don't need to use an archetype, there's as many methods almost as there are people. It's really useful, as I said before, as directors to know about them, as it simply gives us more choice, more ways of doing things. So, I'm going to unpack 2 of the most common archetypes found in documentary, the quest film, the rebirth film, so you can just start to see how accessible they are for you. The literal definition of a quest archetype is very simple, one sentence: a character or a group trying to achieve something they want or feel is important. That's it. A character or group trying to achieve something they want or feel is important. Not complicated. Sound familiar? Yes. Now, hundreds and hundreds of documentaries are quest films. Man on Wire, Free Solo, Waltz with Bashir. And also quest films in documentary time can be a quest for the truth as well. So any investigative film where the director is wanting to uncover something is a quest story, where the director, however, is the character that we go on an emotional journey with. So archetypes describe a basic story from the point of view of the audience, not the storyteller, as it's the audience we want to engage. And in a quest story, there's just 4 basic parts or elements. That's the map, so to speak. Part 1, the character tells us what they want. Part 2, they set out to get that. 3, they encounter obstacles along the way, the biggest part of a quest film. And 4, there's some sort of meaningful resolution. And obviously in docs, that's not some cheesy or forced ending like perhaps in Hollywood. If we take Man on Wire, which I'm sure many of you have seen as an example of a good quest story, we can use those 4 steps and we can describe it as follows. Frenchman Philippe Petit tells us he wants to walk on a tightrope between the World Trade Center buildings in New York. They're over 400 meters high, so it's It's an amazing thing, a risky thing to do. He sets out on his quest by practicing on the tightrope in his garden. He discovers all sorts of technical difficulties might happen at wires in that height, like wind and wire flex and stuff. He gathers a team around him. They work through problems. He does test walks in France, Australia, where he solves more problems. He encounters even more that he didn't know about, so they have to work through those. And finally, he gets to New York, where the World Trade Center buildings are. And they have to even sort of act like bank robbers and plan a heist to get into the high security World Trade Center, let alone get all their equipment in. But finally, having overcome all those obstacles over many years, he sets out on this incredibly brave feat. And things go so well, Philippe spends a whole 45 minutes on the wire performing feats to an amazed audience below in the streets of New York. And in a great quote, his walk becomes known as the artistic crime of the century. Now, look, please don't think that it's just because of the drama of what Philippe did that keeps people watching and that you have to have some daredevil subject like that. No, not at all. There's a 1940s quest fiction film about a man who simply has his bicycle stolen and he goes looking for it. And that film is often voted one of the best films ever made. So it's not obviously not just about the man and his bike. It's actually a parable, a spiritual fable, and a really deep look into the state of one person. But more on that in a minute, because we can see what, as we sort of discover what archetypes allow directors to do. So in the quest archetype, if you as the director establish that your character wants something at the beginning of your film, just like Philippe does, then the natural dramatic tension for the audience is, will that character get that result by the end of the film? It sounds very simple, and it is. It's simple human psychology. It's the way we're wired. But it works incredibly well because all audiences, or we all as people, we want to resolve unresolved tension. We don't like unresolved tension. We want to get to an answer. So storytellers over millennia have noted this fantastic use of unresolved tension. And that's why the quest story is an archetype. So yeah, when the stakes are high, like Philippe on Man on Wire, there's more drama. But it doesn't matter to the audience really at the beginning of the film what it's about. They simply know there's a character in front of them that will want to achieve something. And they watch, this is the key, they watch. It sounds a simple reason, it sounds a crazy reason to keep watching, but they watch because, as I said with earlier rebirth stories, they are learning about how other people deal with obstacles in life. That's really why we watch quest films, because we can all learn how those people deal with those problems. And then as viewers, we can bring some of that invaluable learning into our own lives. So in the saturated media landscape we live in today, it's very hard to get anyone to find our films as we don't have the marketing budgets like fiction film world. But given the amount of films our audiences watch, if they see a character who starts your film by wanting something, they're more likely to notice and watch your film because they've enjoyed many other films where characters have wanted something and they've enjoyed those, and they feel, moreover, they know where they are. They feel like there's something in it for them. Because, you know, audiences love to meet new people and see new places, but they just simply need a reason to start watching your film. And archetypes can provide that trigger or that hook. So please don't think this word archetype is trying to stuff your unique ideas into some sort of generic box. Absolutely not. It's giving you, in the case of a quest story, it's giving you a dramatic, relatable structure so that an audience recognizes that. You don't have to struggle to create that. And the freedom that gives you liberates you to then bring all the magic only you as the director have with your particular characters, their particular world, and all the unique ideas only you have as a director that you want your audience to engage with. That's the real freedom for directors using archetypes. Man on Wire isn't really about the momentary walk Philippe does between the two towers. It's about the power of dreams, the feeling and power of dreams, the strength of friendship, what happens when that falls apart, how an act of faith on the part of one man can inspire and change us all. That's really, those things are what the director really wants to show us. But they're harder themes to get an audience interested in right at the beginning of a film when they don't know anything about where they're going. So that's where the hook or the trigger of starting a film with somebody like Philippe saying, I want to do something dramatic, that becomes really useful. So that's the first powerful thing archetypes can do for us as directors. They enable us to take our unknown world of our stories and characters, worlds which our audiences really want to journey in, but at the outset, with an archetype, we can help the audience make them seem familiar, emotionally relevant and accessible, so that they will actually join us and go on the journey we want them to. The second powerful thing archetypes do for us is to help with what I call the tyranny of choice. It's a real issue for most, if not all of us making documentaries. Unlike fiction, where there's a tight script created to control the shoot, we documentary people are faced with endless possibilities, endless. The tyranny of choice, as I've said. Reality folds around us and our characters 24/7, drowns us with a sort of vast number of story and filming possibilities. And really, any of you who've made a film know that you could probably make 10 films in 10 different ways about your characters and the subject. But we're not funded to do that. We don't want to do that. We really just want to make one great film. So we're going to get really clear about one story. And if we can't find that one story, keep a clear head about it, what tends to happen is we get lost, we get confused, we get bogged down with detail, we get constantly distracted with endless things that seem important at the time, but very quickly they become not important in the edit. And I speak from experience here. I've been right up to the neck in this. I've been swimming and drowning. So it's not something I'm not aware of. And if we're not careful, we can shoot, particularly in an age of digital, we can shoot hundreds of hours of disconnected rushes. And I remember sitting there once saying to myself, look, this is just like trying to do a really large jigsaw without the picture on the box. It was, dark. And also, when you think about it, at best, maybe our film's 90, 100 minutes long. The waste of resources, if you're shooting hundreds of hours, is just not good for our budget nor for the planet. So archetypes, by understanding them, by sort of wearing a new pair of glasses called archetypes, they can really help us cut down on this infinite number of choices and even get some sort of picture on the jigsaw box before we start, so we can bring a direction to our shoot. And I'll unpack the rebirth archetype as a way to illustrate what I mean by this, which is the second of our archetypes, as I said. Rebirth archetype, definition is an event forces a character to change or adapt, a process involving confrontation, journey of catharsis, and redemption, possibly. 4 steps in an archetype, in a rebirth archetype film. An event dramatically changes something in character's life. They're forced to confront that event either internally or externally. They struggle with it, and that struggle leads to a desire for emotional psychological release. They sort of go on a journey of catharsis. And out of the catharsis, there may, just maybe, some sort of redemption, and they're a different, better person than they were before. The film I mentioned, My Haitian Journey, is a classic rebirth story. But in documentaries, because we can get really close to our subjects and we can establish a lot of trust with our characters, and because our audiences know we're shooting real people, going through real challenges, what they're watching is authentic, documentaries and rebirth stories go really well together. The Haitian film, as I said, something traumatic happened to me. I had to confront it. I got stuck in some PTSD for a few years, but then I decided to try and break the nightmares, pick up a camera, and went back to try and find the man who did it. All because I was trying to get some emotional psychological release. And although that silly idea of looking for him didn't work, I did go on a healing journey of catharsis with my Haitian friend in a Haitian way. and finally got rid of my demons. Now, as I said, people watch rebirth films because they can learn something about how other people who are, honest and brave enough and whatever to put themselves and their doubts and their fears and vulnerabilities on the screen. It doesn't have to be quite as dramatic as being shot to make a rebirth film. I watched Val the other day, the film about Hollywood actor Val Kilmer. He survives throat cancer, his voice is affected, and coming to terms with that change, he decides to fulfill a lifelong passion of making a film. And he puts himself into that film as a way of finding release, catharsis, and meaning. Nan Goldin in Laura Poitras's current film, All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, her journey of making lots of fascinating personal and political art is triggered by her near-fatal fentanyl addiction. In Marwen Cole, a really beautiful film, character overcomes a physical attack by making a whole world of miniature in his garden. And in a Netflix film, My Big Beautiful Brain, a young woman creates a new life for herself after a stroke at 34. I'm sure maybe in the chat you could start putting rebirth stories or quest films if you can think of them, because there's lots. So coming back to what I said about, that's the rebirth story in a sort of nutshell. Coming back to what I said about getting some clarity around our story, cutting down on the tyranny of choice many of us face. We can use this rebirth archetype as an example. It's made up of 4 elements, as I said: difficult event, triggers change, confrontation to the change, journey to find emotional release, meaning and purpose again. And there were 4 elements in the quest archetype. There's a small number of basic elements to all the archetypes. But what's key here is that those 4 steps in the quest or rebirth, they're in essence a simple roadmap of the main emotional narrative tentpoles in your film, in a quest or rebirth film. So if you know your character is engaged in a quest for something or is dealing with something difficult, even if the event happened in the past, you have a much clearer idea of the type of material you need to shoot before you pick a camera up. And also you have a basic assembly map of the edit if you are, if your character is either of those things, going on a quest or going on a rebirth journey. All sorts of interesting things happen, of course, in the edit and the shoot, and there's no rules about what I'm saying here. I'm just giving us options, ways to reduce the tyranny of choice. But given the bulk of the screen time in a quest film is about those challenges and obstacles the characters face, hopefully overcome, and in a rebirth film, the bulk of the screen time is about what the character does to find release. Those type of scenes are where what you film will have a good chance of being used in the edit. Again, this doesn't mean you only shoot that sort of material. Archetypes are not restricting you in any way, but they're focusing you on what is needed to tell the basic story. And once you do that, it really does help cut down on the vast number of possible filming choices you could make, most of which seem interesting, but not all of them in the end are useful. Lastly, archetypes work for wide audiences. I'm from a public service background. That's why I'm so passionate about them, because we can reach a lot of people. We can compete with fiction, even though we don't have the budgets, because people, the wide audiences we're looking for know that when they're watching a documentary that comes from an archetypal story, all those wonderful experiences, emotional and psychological ones, are shared by us, by all the viewers, and certainly by the characters, regardless of cultures or backgrounds. So that's the power that you can harness as a director if you start looking for those sort of stories, start looking for narratives that are driven much more by emotion and psychology rather than information. Because if you see a reflection of any archetypes in your characters, or if you work with someone like me and discover those things, you can then write up or pitch a really clear, focused film story about who is doing what and why, built on the power of these universally shared emotions. That's something most funders prefer to read or hear about, a film story, who's doing what and why, rather than just purely information-driven proposals, because they know a general audience needs characters they can relate to, learn from. For those of you making important cause or issue-driven films, yeah, great. The best way, though, to get your audience to be real agents of change is to activate their hearts, not just their heads. And the best way of doing that is to find characters involved in those causes who can take you on a really emotional journey. Jim Guilty did that film I made in Mexico, as did like a recent film like The Territory, shot in Brazil. Once you get close to people who are doing something important, you go on that emotional journey, you feel so much more about their struggle. And that's what, that emotion, that energy you take from the cinema, and you can do something about it. So look, this is a deep dive, a brief dive into archetypes. And I just hope you can start to see how valuable they are as tools for you as directors. You can learn more about them. As I said, on my website, just email, and I'm very happy to talk to you for 20 minutes about where you are in your story and then maybe how I can help. But certainly now it'd be great, just to get some sort of questions and answers going as well.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Okay, so we're going to begin the Q&A portion of this event. So you can put your questions in the chat for now, and maybe in a bit we'll use the raised hand feature, but I think predominantly we'll be having things in the chat currently. I wanted to open the Q&A up first to Julie and Arthur. Do you have any questions that come up for you two specifically after listening to Jeffrey? Okay, quite a few. Well, Julie, do you want to start us off?
Yes, Jeffrey, I would like you to expand a little bit on, this idea that maybe someone has no concept of like this world that I'm in or these people that I know, and it seems really distant from the viewer because it's just not something that they have experience in specifically. So how do we like attract people to that? And can you just say more about how like this idea of an archetypal pathway can help people enter into something, even that, it happened to me the other day. I was watching a trailer for something that I thought I had absolutely no interest in, but by the end of it, I can't wait to see that film now. So can you just say a little more how that works?
That's just a really good point. Something in that trailer, and for everybody, the next doc you watch that maybe hasn't been sent to you or something like that, but if you choose to watch something, try and unpick just a few decisions you made about why you're watching that film. Because somewhere there will be, in the title, in the picture, in the description, the trailer or something, there'll be a common, universally held emotion that says, I can relate to this somehow. This is not literal or driven by information. It's allowing me in because there's a common emotion out there. So that's what I mean about putting a different sort of head on our shoulders. If our narratives are driven forward by emotion, not information, many, many more people will find that resonance, that link, that bridge. They'll go, yeah, I know what struggle is. I know what pain is. I know what trying to get obstacles through in my life are. I will watch this because I've watched films before like that. I've seen a Rebirth film I liked. I've seen a Quest film I liked. I learned something. I was moved. So that huge barrier, because we live in this ultra competitive marketplace, how is someone going to find, let alone watch our stuff? That building that link outwards is just common sense. And it's what Hollywood does a lot. Obviously, they put a lot of effort into attracting the widest possible audience by finding things that are going to resonate with everybody. But we can do that. It's not as if we're forcing our docs into a box in any way. As I said, we're liberating ourselves to get a wide audience and to find and do all the magical things that we can do with our films and our stories.
Jeffrey, I have a question for you. I was wondering if you could go and first, actually, my first question is, I know you went into depth about the quest story and the rebirth form, but can you just tell us briefly what the other 5 are? I think that would be interesting.
Sure. There's, as I said, look, there's really, I don't know whether there's agreement about everything, but the quest film, yes, where people want something, rebirth, where something bad happens usually, and people have to confront and go on a journey. These are sort of, they come from a drama background, tends because we haven't used them in docs, so they've sort of got drama headings. Third one, overcoming. A person, a place, a belief, an ideology is threatened, and the character seeks to overcome this threat. It's called Overcoming the Monster in David and Goliath. I know of so few docs that fit that pattern though, because it's like a monster film where Tom Cruise meets Godzilla and defeats Godzilla, and then Tom goes back to work and Tom's the same. The action, the drama is in the defeating of something. I mean, and in docs that's sort of mostly unrealistic. Poverty, racism, climate change is not going to be defeated. There's people working to do that, but that archetype really doesn't have much relevance for docs. As I said, I've only seen sort of 1 or 2. The heroine's journey, that's a famous archetype. Character goes on an epic adventure, victorious in some sort of decisive crisis or battle, returns home changed and transformed. Again, it sort of fits fiction and drama where you can create those battles, Lord of the Rings type of thing, Again, it's very rare, if not impossible in a doc to sort of have that control over things. And usually what happens with docs is we're interested in the internal, we're interested in the moral, the emotional, because we can get close to people. And that's why rebirth works often so well, because the accuracy of the archetype depends on where you start the story. Like a quest is something I choose to do. It's like a will, yes, a conscious choice. But rebirth is if something happens to me that forces me to do something. Even though I may have quest elements in what I do next, like I want to get better or I want to do this, the point is that the beginning of the story, the driver of the story is what happened to me, and that makes it much more of a rebirth than a quest. So these simple sentences, which archetypes are, they seem sort of deceptively simple, but they're actually really accurate a lot of the time when you unpack them about what is going on, because they've been refined over a long period of time, and they really are acute observations of common human emotions and psychology. Rags to riches, again, sort of classic Hollywood stuff. Poor character acquires a degree of success, loses or sacrifices some of it, only to find they've been sort of gained in personal growth or insight. Yes, rare to find something like that in docs. I have worked on one where that was really clearly the case, and it's great because, again, lots of audience members have seen all these archetypes actually because of the amount of viewing they do. Tragedy, second last one or the last one. I look at the series of events that lead to a negative, tragic outcome, either for a group or a society or an individual. Very rare in documentaries, even though a lot of what we deal with is difficult stuff. Again, where we like to get under the skin rather than look at things in a sort of general way. And lots of people in docs genuinely seek out some sort of redemption with their characters, not to put a cheesy ending on it, but tragedy, like Macbeth. That's the classic Shakespearean tragedy. As I said, again, it's not quite so common for docs. It's just not the way we tend to look for stories like that. Comedy is the last one. Negative events leading to a positive outcome. I've never had a comedy archetype in a doc. Again, not that we don't have humor in our films, but it just doesn't shape itself like that. So I think lots of these stories, there's elements of lots of things in films, but what audiences love the most is when they know where they are. You can't mix archetypes up in a film. It just confuses the audience. And remember, at least for me, I'm always about where the audience is. That's crucial to me. I'm making this for them. I want them to be clear. I want to communicate to them. So if you think you've got 2 or 3 archetypes in a film, you just keep asking questions. You will, with someone like me, you will be able in the end to unpick exactly where and why it started like that.
Jeffrey, that actually leads me to my second question, or second and third, but they're kind of related. What steps do you typically, how do you start figuring out the archetypes? I'm assuming, aside from research and looking at your footage, do you like make a storyboard, or how do you break it down in archetypal forms?
Yeah.
And yeah, just what specific steps can people take to kind of implement these ideas?
The only way to do it is a joint session with director, producer, or director about their characters, what it is they want to do. And it's a really great forensic interactive session where we discover together, because I don't know beforehand, we're going to discover together what's going on. A lot of people making films realize, because it's a quest film where they want to find out something, they end up realizing that actually they are the character that we're going to go on a journey with. That's quite a big change for a lot of people, for example. But I won't know that, nor will they, until we really start to unpack what it is they're wanting to say, and or what is it their characters are doing. I mean, because in a film where characters don't meet, where you, the director, are bringing them together by way of wanting to say something, chances are then you are the author of that film. You are the person that we need to go on a journey with. As I said, it comes like quite of a shock to some people to think, oh, I'm not that egocentric, or I'm not that interesting, or it's not about me. No, actually, it's about how the audience goes on a journey. You don't even really have to appear, but we need to hear what it is that you are doing as the director, if you're doing that. So it's a lovely, interactive, fascinating approach, a bit like therapy almost, in as much as there's questions and questions and questions, and you're going to get to the beating heart in the end of the film idea and the characters.
Mm-hmm. And so then, as a follow-up to that, how do you think about this kind of balance of keeping archetypes in mind and helping having the archetypes help us kind of focus our vision, while also not stumbling into kind of some sort of formula, or having it actually limit our view and predetermine what we're going to shoot in a way that maybe takes us away from discovering new things and exploring. Because sometimes when you're shooting, you start one place and then you end up all the way over here in a way that you didn't know you would end up in. So how do you kind of balance that?
I mean, the archetype is not prescriptive. There's no rule, there's no set of rules here. It's obviously all totally in your control. But what becomes clear to directors is if they see this in their characters, if this becomes a really achievable, accessible way to enter into an emotional narrative, it basically starts to tell them what's important to shoot. It's not the other way around usually. And people can shoot what they like. Of course they can, but they're already starting to think about things in an emotionally different way, a logical way, according to the archetype, if it is an archetype-driven film. So there's no danger of not, what's the word, not being open to anything. We will still shoot a lot more, of course we will, than ends up on the screen. And some of those things can be fantastically lucky and interesting and wonderful. And I'm the first person to not shut down any sort of possibilities like that. I'm just saying, this helps you at the beginning think of where you want to go to get something up that then you can free yourself up from that need to create a structure that relates to an audience. You can then start bringing all these other interesting things into the film because you've got a structure that works.
And one last question before we start opening it up to the audience. Well, how do you think this could benefit a more experimental, nonlinear films?
If you want to find a large audience, these are definitely things to be interested in. If you're playing with form and experimenting with storytelling itself, and some of those films, I grew up watching those films as a student, and I still love them. I mean, that's completely, the case. I don't think the archetype has got archetypes in general. They are wanting to deal with characters on an emotional journey. Lots of films have decided to step away from that and do something else, just as interesting, just as varied. And as I said at the beginning, our stories are evolving all the time, and the means to tell them are evolving all the time. If you want to find a wider audience, if you want to engage people on a universal journey, this is a tool that's worthwhile, but it's not the only one, of course.
Before we get to the audience, Arthur and Julie, do you have any questions that you would like to ask?
Presently, there are no questions. Are there any questions, guys? No. Presently, there are no questions.
Thank you. Julie, do you have one final note or? Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to be alternating between raised hands and questions that have come into the chat. If your question is in the chat, I have it on a list, so don't worry about that. I see Alexis, you have a raised hand. Do you wanna ask your question? Alexis Fish.
Hi, yeah. Thank you so much. I'm currently making a project about some trans actors in a trans film that went to Sundance and was in competition. And the lead actor wound up winning a award for best acting, which they don't really give out at competition. It was special jury. And my idea is that I make a lot of media around LGBTQ folks. And my idea is that it's another way to show the world the story of trans lives kind of caged in this Sundance journey. They were just at Berlin, they're closing New York directors or the new directors. And I'm trying to figure out, really for grant applications, what this story is. Is it the story of the film? Is it the story of the main actor? How long do I follow them? Do I follow them to when they, get their first Marvel film, or do I follow to the film's release? And I was wondering if you had any innate sense about it.
How long's a piece of string? I mean, my goodness. I think at the core of films about our spectrum of, people and genders and sexuality and anything else is this idea of identity. Because all of us will relate to that. All of us can feel, what is our identity? How do we define it? When is it questioned? How do we manifest it? So it's looking for that beating heart of universality in any issue or with any character. Ask yourself questions: how and what is it? What are the words that spring to mind that connect any group with anybody else. And that will give you at least a start. I mean, it's very hard to answer your question, given there's a whole total sort of universe of questions there about production.
Yeah.
But find that, because then other people will find a way to identify with that struggle. It's about identity.
Thank you.
That's the central thing that's really at stake there.
Thank you.
I have another question from the chat that I really love. From Mariella Busolati, what if the character who has a quest is not a human, but a thing? In Mariella's film, in my last film is a park.
Archetypes are only about people, because only people can give us emotions that we relate to. It doesn't mean the subject of film can't be anything, but we can only relate emotionally to other people in the sense of going on some sort of journey. So people can make great films about places and cities, but they usually need a human conduit so that we can go on that journey. As I said, great films can be made about really important issues and causes, but the ones that connect and get energy out from the cinema and really can activate change are when there's people involved with those things. So that's the archetypal universe. It's not saying it's the only way by any means. It's certainly not doing that, as I keep saying. But it is centered on people, because that's where we share commonality.
So do you think if the subject of the film is not a person, there's no way to incorporate archetypes, or would there have to
I
be?
don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, because if there's no people in the film, then it's probably difficult, to be honest. But as I said, archetypes are not. I'm not sitting here saying they're the only way to do anything. This is just a tool that you can use in your toolbox, but it works well when there's people involved.
This brings up for me another question is, what other limitations perhaps of archetypes do you think exist in terms of filmmaking? I mean, not only applying to people is maybe one. Is there any other limitation that comes to mind that you can think of?
Well, they as I said, they're looking for commonality, but maybe that's not what the filmmaker wants. So they might not be very useful to you at that point. They're useful when you want them to be useful and connect out to people from different places, different ways, and you want to find something that communicates maybe something that's complex, but you do that in a way that's universal. But yes, I mean, as I said, there's no one size fits all for any of the work we do. It's just another tool that you can put in your toolbox and know, yes, this will help me if I'm doing these things.
Beautiful. Okay, Gabriella Figueredo. Another Gabriella.
Hi there. Hi, Gabriella. Hi, Jeffrey and IDA. Thanks for hosting this. I wanted to ask you about historical documentaries. I'm developing a historical documentary kind of related to slavery in the Caribbean, which is also where I'm from. So how can you apply an archetype to something in the past? Does it need a connection with the present?
Good question. If there's accounts, letters, diaries, obviously depending on the age of the subject, whether there's archival interviews or anything else, but you can still look for those common universal things that connect an historical character with us today, because the emotions haven't changed. They're all still the same, regardless of the age. It's just, can you find something that might have been written by them or about them, or letters, diaries, or anything else. So you can get an insight into that character, because then you can unlock that part of it. And that will make it seem way more universal as a story, even though it's in the past. It'll almost be like that person's alive, because this is such a common shared experience. So really look for the things they tried to do, or the things that happened to them, what they made of those things. And there's, because it was non-visual age, depending on how long ago it was you're talking about, there may well be letters, there may well be other things that are great to voice and then come alive like that.
Thank you.
Another question from the chat, from Laj. What are some tools we can use to storyboard or map out the story?
Well, the archetype list, and there's one I made up, and maybe send it to Julie and send it out. But there's those 4 steps that I detailed in the talk. That's the big, at least, emotional narrative tentpoles that you can use. And what a lot of us do is we just take those 4 headings, for example, if it's a quest or rebirth or something else, and populate that with your characters and your events, and start moving it around. And that becomes a really fast way to get up a structure, to get up a trailer, to write a synopsis, to do an assembly edit, because you know your material really well, but you're shaping it with that particular emotional arc. So it's way faster because you've got a guiding principle, really, and just 4 or 5 things to look for. Doesn't simplify it, because you can get really complex stuff going on in all those areas, but it gives you a map to start with, and that's really great when you've got so many choices.
What I'm imagining from you saying this is like someone in their office with a bunch of like notes on the wall, just moving them around from category to category of different things that could happen, that happen on their beat sheet or that they know
Yeah,
of.
well, if it's a rebirth film and there's somebody's doing something to find a way to get better, and like some of those films I mentioned, that is the biggest part of a rebirth film. That's why we watch them. That's 90% of the screen time. So you're looking for scenes to go into that big box. The more of those things you've got, the better, because you will be able to see what the person's doing. You'll be able to journey with them across that. So it's, as I said, it starts to tell you what to do really as well. And film isn't intellectual at the end of the day. It's just so much more gut driven and so much more of a simple journey. Look, a man has his bicycle stolen and goes looking for it. Why is that a classic film? Why does that resonate with people? It's because it's actually not about the literal narrative. It's about the morality, the spirituality, the psychology, the emotion, all the things that we bring to that story. Like, we are also making up the narrative as an audience as we go along. We're filling in all those gaps that the director hopefully is wisely left for us.
And so what do you suggest when maybe the archetype isn't so clear? Right? You said there can't really be overlap in archetype, but sometimes it might not be an obvious archetype, right? Are there any tips or tricks that you use for kind of narrowing down what it could be?
Usually just more questions. That's what keeps it going. I mean, I've worked with lots of people who maybe 1 hour into it, 2 hours into it, say something that all of a sudden unlocks it, because that's exactly why they were interested in the character in the first place. They may not even remember that, or they may not think it's irrelevant all of a sudden, but it is. It goes, I get it. There's a sort of aha moment there. Because if you're dealing with people characters, it's not to say that they're all going to fit into some sort of archetypal box, but many will. And so it's really just a lovely exercise in to find out, how can that happen? It will make your film appeal to a wider audience if you can start it like that. It's not the only way to tell the film by any means. But as I said, you can, with just the right questions or the right guide, you can usually get to understand what it is that's at the beating heart of it. What was it that excited you about that person when you first met them? Because that's exactly the same thing as what will excite an audience.
Thank you. Mina?
Hi, I think, is it for Mina Brooks?
Oh, Mina Chow? Oh, you're muted.
Mute. Okay, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to try to get other people's questions in here too, but the first thing is they wanted to ask you to repeat the 4 steps of the rebirth that you had said really quickly, and I typed in the chat what Pamela had written, and then this. But my original question, sorry, I started a chat issue way earlier on, was what do you think about the reenactments as well? That's my second one, because I have a problem with them, and especially with people that don't have access to the resources for reenactment and such. But so that was my original question, but then if you could repeat the 4 steps of the thank you.
Do the 4 steps first. An event happens to somebody, usually something they don't want. They confront that event. They have to. They're forced to. You know, is it war, medical death, something big often. Third step, out of that confrontation, there comes a point where the character, as we see in real life all the time, at some point they work out they've got to get back to finding meaning and purpose again. Whether it's getting the kids up for the morning in the school, or whether it's just getting a job, or whether it's doing anything, there's a process by which we all have to confront putting one step forward again in front of the other. So that process of finding purpose and meaning again in life, depending on what's happened, is catharsis. That's the third big step. That's the thing we watch these films for, because we love feeling close to people that let us in to their fears and doubts and vulnerabilities. That's an intimate privilege to have with another person through the director, because that brave and honest person's letting us in so that we don't feel so alone in our problems. And also we can learn something about how they dealt with theirs. So that's the big, important part of a rebirth film, the third part. Sometimes there's a redemption. Sometimes there's something at the end that the person may, they'll certainly be different, but they may have even gained insight or some other quality or something. It's not essential in any sense, not at all. It's just that can be the case and works out in real life. So there's those 4. Again, in most sort of websites and other things will break some of this down for you. Enactments, you said? Yes, it's a problem with docs, because a lot of doc people, I think, feel the drama is in the external action or something. It's in the car chase or the cops or something that the person's trying to you're trying to illustrate that you don't have pictures for. Often that gets in the way, as you say, because we know it's inauthentic. And the moment that happens, we've broken that spell, that sort of moral contract we have with our audience that what you're watching is true. Lots of times it can be just as powerful. I worked on a film where a woman in India suffered a horrendous acid attack. And all it was in the end was her words over a low drone shot at night of the village where it happened. That was it. Her authentic, highly emotionally charged words over something neutral that allowed those words to come into me. Nothing special, but way more effective, way more powerful.
I agree. Thank you so much. Thank you.
There you go. I mean, that's a subjective point of view. I mean, but seriously, authenticity is what our audience expects from us. It's part of, I think, as I said, the moral contract we have with contributors and with our audience.
Thank you.
I have a series of questions from the chat that I'm going to try to combine into one question, which is, Are there any exceptions to there only being one archetype for the story? For instance, if you have multiple characters, could each character have a different archetype? Or if you're working with a series, a multi-part series, could each episode, what are kind of the flexibilities and variations of applying the archetype? Does it have to be so like the whole film is this archetype or
starting with a series? Look, I mean, as I said, all this comes from the point of view of the audience. That's the only thing, as I said, to me that matters in the end is them. What's clear about where they are in the process, not what we want, but it's what they want. And in a series, as long as, obviously there's each individual episodes, you can do what you like across a series, and you may want to. It may be varied, it may be much more interesting to do it like that. In a film where there's multiple characters, you said they are not in the same archetype, they're not coming from the same place. That's much more of an issue because the audience doesn't know who is following it. And besides, you've only got a certain amount of screen time with characters. So it's much better to spend more time with less people who are on the same journey than 10 people who we barely get to know because they get 6 or 5 or 10 minutes each. So that's the first thing that often doesn't work with lots of people. But I'm just working on a film now with 3 people, but they're all part of, I mean, it's 3 in 1. One reflects all of them. They all add together to do the same thing. But as I said, see it from the audience perspective. They just want to know where they are and what they're watching. And that means clarity. So if they're competing, the point is, why would you do that? Just take that character out. That's not serving the story at that level for an audience anyway.
Well, I had Jim Oppenheimer brought up a specific example of a film that potentially has 2 different archetypes. Sorry, I work in archival. I keep saying archives.
That's all right.
So the recent film Wildcat, which I don't know if you've had a chance to watch yet. Part of the story is about this young vet overcoming, severe PTSD from being at war in Afghanistan, and the other. So that could be like a rebirth story, but then it also involves him trying to save these ocelots, like cats. I think they're ocelots.
Sure.
And that's a whole thing, which could be, a quest of getting this one cat to adulthood and back into the wild.
But it sounds like his saving is part of his catharsis. That's what he's doing to get better, to feel better, to be himself again. Inside what he's doing, there's things I want to do. So it looks like it's a quest, but it's driven by the PTSD. It's driven by his need to get better. So that's what's important there. He can do all sorts of things to get better, some of which are, I want to achieve X, but that doesn't make it a quest archetype. It just makes it, there's quest elements inside his cathartic journey.
So maybe a question to be asking yourself while you're looking at your film is, why is this person doing what they're doing? What is
Precisely. Archetypes are so piercingly good at why. It's all about motivation. Why is this character doing something? That's what storytellers and audiences have observed over millennia. When you understand the why, you can find a way through it. And that's what archetypes are great at doing, is getting to the why.
I have, before I pick on someone with their hand raised, in the similar vein, can you address how to maintain a clear focus and storyline with a film that essentially grows into an ensemble piece, in which the main character ends up building community or joining with others who become key players in their story and to find redemption for self and others? So this question is really directed toward the challenges of writing proposals for this kind of more complex film to keep the pitch from getting too diffuse, but also applies to planning and knowing what to shoot. which I think, you just mentioned the difficulties of having a big cast of characters, participants in your film. So how do you work around that?
Well, again, if you've got one or two or key people, they're the driver. That's where you want to spend, where you want an audience to go with those people on the journey. Because if it's the journey, if it's the meaning, if it's the things that you want to communicate, it's best done through a smaller number of people. They can represent thousands, hundreds, but making those people a part of the film doesn't serve your purpose of communicating what it is you want to communicate. And again, people can represent, hundreds and thousands of others, and that's great and powerful in an archetypal way, because all you do is cut to a wide shot of people and you realize that this person's the ambassador for so many people, or it's their common experience that's driving so many things forward. Like in Presumed Guilty, one guy that's falsely imprisoned, we follow him, but he represents everyone in that prison. Indeed, most of the people in Mexico who've been sort of, victims of injustice. So that's really great when you do that, because the audience is the feelings carried through central characters. That's just inherently good. We spend, as I said, more quality time getting to know them, all their doubts and journeys and their difficulties and their hopes and fears and dreams, rather than fracture that with just more people. You reach more emotion and power and anger and whatever when you spend quality time with characters.
Kimberly Ford.
Hi. I have a question about your process of getting started. Once you have an idea or a story that you want to tell, do you particularly wait around for funding, or if you have, or I'm asking about your process. So do you start just filming, or, if you're going into a more complicated story where you do need some funding, like when do you begin, basically?
When do you begin the funding part?
No, like when do you, so if you know what story you want to tell and you have, planned out your narrative and you are ready, but you're also kind of in this space where you're waiting for funding, you're waiting for grants, but you don't know when to start shooting, I guess. Does that make sense?
Sure. I mean, again, you can't spend too much time with your characters just watching, imbibing what it is they do. You become part of the furniture, you see the things they do, the people they meet. You make sure that all those sort of access is in place and you've got that trust with them, because that's the magic thing for an audience, is when they trust you. I, thousands of miles away, can feel that trust. I can feel that goodwill between you and your country, your characters, your contributors. And that's special and really worth aiming for. Also because when difficult things happen, they probably will include you in the process rather than shut you out. So time with people before you turn a camera on, to me, is just invaluable. That's just, as I said, it's just one way of peeling an onion. But if you don't have the money yet, just keep, be immersed in their world, because that's when, as I said, they will feel like you know and they trust you and you can do anything with them. And there's always something you can learn, even with, like I said, another day spent with people. It's a really lovely process.
Thank you.
I have a question from Elizabeth McNamara. There is a lot of discussion about providing balance in storytelling of complex and controversial topics. So I am wondering if this results in less audience emotional connection because they are not rooting for everybody.
Any particular example of the balance film?
Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to put that in the chat, if you're The Vow. Okay.
Oh, I don't know that one. Can someone
The
describe?
Vow is a series about NXIVM, the cult, basically. And a lot of the characters, participants, I would say most of them are current and former cult members. And even
Is
the
it-
former.
Right. Is it voiced over by someone, or is it a feature doc or a series where people speak for themselves?
It's a series, and there are interviews with them, and a lot of archival footage of some of the people, the main characters.
Yeah. But is there a voice of God narration or not?
I don't think so, but I don't. There is narration, but it's like from the cult leader. But
Okay.
But there's no voice of God narration. No.
Yeah.
I
mean,
think it's kind of about the dismantling of this cult, but also about by some of the people who had been in it. But I think their own participation. It's all a little murky territory.
yeah. Don't know quite what to say. I mean, but pieces of journalism, there's obviously a need to try and get two sides of a story. But in docs, people are going, increasingly they go for something subjective. They go to enter the world of somebody else, right or wrong. We want to know how other people tick. So I sort of can't answer it perhaps as clearly because I don't know the film.
I think perhaps maybe another way of framing this is, do we always have to be rooting for the participants of the film or the characters in the film? And is it okay if sometimes the person going on this journey, whatever kind of journey it might be, is not necessarily a sympathetic or likable, which I know is a loaded word.
Sure. I mean, in the tragedy film I did work on, I mean, a guy that's pretty nasty, and he brings about his own downfall. So, but we learn something about what people do along the way, but we certainly don't like the guy. I don't think liking people it's a bit of a shallow way to put it, isn't it? I mean, we're interested in other people and why they tick. We can learn a lot about people. Some people who do bad things, like the judge in the presumed guilty film in Mexico, he thought he was doing the right thing. But he's just a little cog in a big machine. He couldn't even see what he was doing. And I think we see that when we watch the film. But it's pretty dangerous territory to get into, us as filmmakers, putting overt judgments and things on the rest of it. I don't find that filmmaking sort of anywhere near as actually fair and interesting and stimulating as letting people speak for themselves.
We're about to wrap up the Q&A portion, but before we do, Jim, you've had your hand up for a while, so would you like to be our last question of the Q&A portion? Oh, sorry, John Fine.
Hi, John.
Yeah. Hi, Jeffrey. If you can share a little bit more thoughts about the notion of multi-characters in a series, especially if the objective of the series is to introduce the audience to a variety of people who each has their own quest. The quest may be related or are related, but they approach them all in different ways and come out with amazing solutions. How would you frame that? Would you have maybe a host whose quest itself is to find these people, or some other way?
I hope I'm understanding you correctly, but I mean, if there's a group of people wanting things, they can be as diverse as you like, and all the better. But the common thing between them is exactly that. They want something. So each of those persons is going to tell you and start and go on a series of, or go on a journey where they encounter obstacles, probably. And that's what brings it together. You wouldn't need any special distinction for an audience, because they know that's a quest film, for example. And you see people doing different things for different reasons and achieving different results and trying out different ways. as long as I said before, you don't have too many people, so we don't really understand them emotionally or their motivation. Then it's the common ground is the archetype itself. It's the quest they're all going on.
So you could have
regardless of the
maybe
details.
3 or 4 people in an episode, each of whom is confronting a similar problem, but doing it in a different way.
Yeah, or confronting a desire they have to do something, whether that's the same or different. Because they all add to each other's story in the end. You can do 4 or 5 different facets of the same thing by just taking one from each.
Great, thanks.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, and thank you everyone for your wonderful questions. So we're actually going to be wrapping up the Q&A part now and putting everybody into different breakout rooms. But before we do that, if whoever's comfortable, I would love to take a screenshot very quickly. So if you could turn on your camera, if you are comfortable doing so, I think that would be great. All right, okay. 1 second. All right, everybody smile. And then one more because we have a lot of people. All right. Thank you so much. Okay. Great. I think you're all being put into your breakout rooms now to continue the discussion.
Hi, everyone. This is Abby, and just a quick addendum to all of that. Thank you, first of all, to Julie and to Arthur for coming up with the idea for this session and for inviting members of your film schools and media centers to also be a part of this. The breakout rooms are open, but we will actually you get to choose which breakout rooms you want to join if you would like to continue discussing amongst yourselves. In order to access the breakout rooms, please, at the bottom of your screen, you will see the breakout room button is now enabled. If you click on that, you will see there's rooms 1 through 5, and you can click on join in order to access the breakout rooms. If you have any questions, just turn on your mics and we'll direct everybody there. Thank you so much to Jeffrey for your talk and for answering everybody's questions so patiently. Round of applause. Thank you also to our ASL interpreters, to Vicky and to Jordan for providing access. We will not have ASL interpretation in the breakout rooms, but I'm about to turn on automatic captions for anyone who needs captions in the breakout rooms. All right. And also thank you to Gabriella, my colleague at IDA, for facilitating the Q&As and everything. Yeah, Jeffrey?
Yes. Sorry. I'm just saying, can we save the chat? Or but certainly to thank Gabriella and Julie and Arthur again for allowing all this to happen. It's really fantastic to connect so many people, share a conversation.
Was your question,